somehow, they carried entire nations on their backs. They weren't born leaders, they were built by suffering. Today, we look at the lesser-known personal battles of some of the greatest U.S. presidents in history. Before they sat in the Oval Office, they endured failure, heartbreak, rejection, disease, poverty, war, and came out stronger. Let's begin their stories, not from power, but from powerlessness. Abraham Lincoln. Born in a log cabin in Kentucky, Abraham Lincoln came into a world with almost nothing. His mother died when he was just 9. His sister Sarah became his emotional anchor, and when she passed too, he broke. As a young adult, Lincoln failed in business not once but twice. He lost multiple elections, often mocked for his awkward looks and high-pitched voice. Even the woman he loved, Anne Rutledge, died suddenly, leaving him shattered and spiraling into deep depression. Yet, he never stopped reading. Never stopped growing. As a lawyer, he rode from town to town, often sleeping on floors or under stars. His empathy for common people grew because he was one of them. His nickname, Honest Abe, wasn't a political gimmick, it came from years of humble service. Behind the tall hat and powerful speeches was a man who had tasted every kind of emotional pain. And that's what made him so strong. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came from privilege, but fate didn't care. In 1921, at the age of 39, he was struck by polio. The man who once climbed mountains could no longer walk. Many believed his political career was over. Even close friends abandoned hope. But Roosevelt refused to surrender. He began physical therapy on his own, traveled to Warm Springs, Georgia, and trained himself to stand with leg braces. He learned to hide his pain from cameras, never showing weakness publicly. Then came the Great Depression. America was collapsing, banks were failing, and people were starving. In those dark years, Roosevelt's voice became the nation's candle. His fireside chats on the radio weren't just political updates, they were emotional lifelines. He had lived in darkness. That's why he knew how to lead others through it. John F. Kennedy looked perfect, handsome, confident, charismatic. But inside, he was a battlefield. As a child, he was constantly sick. Doctors often thought he wouldn't live past 30. He suffered from chronic back pain, ulcers, Addison's disease, and required heavy medication throughout his life. But he never let the world see that version of him. During World War II, he commanded a small boat, PT-109, that was attacked by a Japanese destroyer. Despite severe back injuries, Kennedy swam for hours in shark-infested waters, dragging a wounded sailor by his life vest strap clenched in his teeth. That moment defined him, not because he survived, but because he refused to let his men die. Later, in politics, he fought through constant health challenges behind closed doors while publicly inspiring a new generation with his calm strength. When Abraham Lincoln took office in 1861, the country was on fire. 7 states had seceded. War was inevitable. Lincoln, still grieving from personal losses, faced the biggest moral and political crisis in U.S. history. But the boy who had faced death, poverty, and defeat didn't run. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, not just as a legal document, but as a moral stand. He turned the Civil War from a battle of states into a fight for human dignity. At Gettysburg, he delivered a speech that lasted barely 2 minutes, but echoed forever. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Even after victory, he never celebrated. He wanted to heal the South, not punish it. And just when peace was near, he was assassinated. He died a martyr, but lived as a reminder. Real leadership means carrying a bleeding nation on your shoulders, and still choosing unity. Franklin D. Roosevelt's first 100 days in office weren't about speeches. They were about action. He passed more than a dozen major laws to create jobs, save banks, and restore faith. His fireside chats made millions of Americans believe again. But just as the economy began to recover, World War II began. FDR became the only U.S. president elected 4 times. Despite being paralyzed, he became the strongest voice in the free world. He worked with Churchill and Stalin, formed strategic alliances, and helped shape the future United Nations. His leadership wasn't loud, it was steady. He smiled through pain, hid his suffering, and never let his country see him weak. When he died just before Germany surrendered, the world mourned. His story proved this. You don't need to stand tall. John F. Kennedy's presidency lasted only 1,036 days, but changed everything. From the moment he took office, challenges attacked him. The Bay of Pigs invasion failed. The press mocked him. His health was declining. And then came the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 terrifying days, the world stood at the edge of nuclear war. But JFK, behind closed doors, refused to panic. He chose a blockade over bombing. Negotiation over aggression. He wrote letters, made secret deals, and pulled the world back from nuclear destruction. At home, he began pushing civil rights, NASA's moonshot, and education reforms. Then, Dallas. A gunshot ended the dream. But in death, he became a symbol of hope, youth, and peace. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That legacy lives on, not because he was perfect, but because he led with vision in pain. After personal tragedy and time in the Badlands, Theodore Roosevelt came back stronger. As president, he became a force of nature. He broke up corrupt monopolies. He protected 230 million acres of land, creating national parks, forests, and monuments. He built the Panama Canal, connecting oceans and economies. He even won a Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating the end of the Russo-Japanese War. He once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far." He redefined masculinity, not as dominance, but as responsibility. His pain had taught him empathy. His grief had taught him urgency. He didn't just change policies, he changed presidential power forever. Harry S. Truman had no time to prepare. When FDR died, Truman learned about the Manhattan Project, the secret development of nuclear weapons. He made the hardest call in human history. To drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world was stunned. Millions of lives lost. But the war ended. He didn't celebrate. He wept. And he never blamed anyone else. He went on to create the Truman Doctrine, standing against communism, and launching the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt war-torn Europe. He integrated the military, recognized Israel, and led with quiet strength. When he left office, his approval rating was the lowest ever. But decades later, history remembered him differently. Not as a politician, but as a man who did what had to be done. These were not gods. These were not superheroes. These were ordinary men who faced extraordinary pain, and refused to quit. They lost loved ones. They faced war, disease, humiliation, political betrayal. They were sick, broke, hated, and misunderstood. But they stood. Again and again. That's what made them great presidents. Not their wealth. Not their charm. Not their speeches. But their willingness to suffer for something greater than themselves. The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph. George Washington. So the next time you feel broken, remember, this is where greatness begins.